Okay, so my presentation is on the use of lighting in recent movies, or lack of. And to start this off, I actually wanted to show you guys some examples, so here are some clips. Okay, so in all those examples, you might have noticed that the lighting is a little bit difficult to see, where a lot of the objects are just really, it's hard to see any detail, it's hard to see really what's happening. And a lot of that has to do with three things. It has to do with digital cameras. A lot of older films used to use film cameras, but we have changed to digital cameras, which capture a lot of more detail. But overall, a lot of people have been using digital cameras to capture darker shots, which is what you're seeing happening in those clips. You're also seeing dynamic range, or the lack of dynamic range in those. I'll go more into what dynamic range does, but overall that's supposed to help us see better, and you'll see why that's an issue in a minute. And then color grading, which is something that is done with editing in movies, where a lot of the time some people will tend to make their movie seem darker for whatever reason. Maybe it's the mood, maybe it's whatever the filmmaker would want it to be. And in this quote, in real life we are used to having only one shadow on the set. Each hard light casts a shadow. Multiple shadows on film are distracting. Cinematographers take great care to minimize multiple shadows. What this quote is meant to be is kind of talking about the old techniques that used to be done when we were doing our movies with film. Because film was so hard to really make sure that we got every single detail, they would use a lot of light. But because now we're using digital, there doesn't have to be this constant use of light anymore. And so we don't use those techniques anymore. And so things like cutting light, although we still do them in digital camera, a lot of the time film was very reliant on it, which is why old movies were very brightly colored. We were able to see what a lot of the details were, because they were really trying to fight against the shadows, while as today we kind of embrace them. And this also kind of has to do with streaming, and streaming has been a big issue with how we see our movies, because with streaming, every television has it. Every television has access to, like, Netflix, Hulu, and all these things. And a lot of people prefer watching movies at home than going to theaters, even though a lot of these movies are made to be watched in the theater. And the reason this is a problem is because, back to dynamic range, what that does is, this is what we tend to see. We tend to see all shades of blacks and all shades of whites. But dynamic range kind of only gets us to see about this much. And it's really helpful when needing us to see film, because it means that we're able to see every detail. But not every television has high dynamic range. So we kind of have this issue where when films, are filming something in like the dark, like those clips above, they tend to just be black, and that just makes it difficult because we can't necessarily see any fight scenes or really people talking because it's so dark. And dynamic range would help us see it, but because a lot of televisions don't have that option, it tends to just look really hard to see. And that's also to say that some filmmakers do use the dark lighting to their advantage. So in this quote by Amelia, there is still a certain weight to traditional filmmaking techniques. Set building, model making, and animatronics bring a level of authenticity that CGI struggles to replicate. So CGI is something that we've been seeing in a lot of movies, and because people are still trying to work with CGI, and due to the fact that there's a lot of budget with CGI, a lot of filmmakers will tend to use dark lighting to cover up any mistakes that will happen. And so when there's a brightly lit scene, like something like The Thing, which this would be an example of CGI being used where it just looks really bad, we tend to use dark lighting to make sure none of the bad CGI is able to be seen, which doesn't always work in our favor, and so we get something like this. So a lot of, if there's a movie with CGI in it, a lot of the time they're going to utilize the dark lighting. And digital film files aren't susceptible to scratching or wear over time, and they are capable of producing crystal clear, high resolution images. It's just talking about how we kind of we've transitioned to using digital to instead of like going with film, right? Because digital is just better overall. It's better for editing. It's better for all these things. But because it gives us this high resolution images, you know, we can clearly see more of the mistakes when it comes to CGI, which is why dark lighting tends to be utilized more. And another reason why a lot of these films tend to be dark is due to the fact that that's just how a lot of filmmakers want it to look. You might have seen in a lot of movies, like I would say Batman, where the dark lighting is part of the movie. There's a reason for that. And so with techniques where you, sorry, in techniques where you would use the light to really showcase what the actor's doing, a lot of the time these filmmakers want to make it look as realistic as possible. And so in old movies like The Terminator, where you can see right here, it's like there's a lot of blue lighting, we get to see everything that we need to see, or The Insider, where even if a character is dark, there tends to be some sort of blue lighting. You don't really get to see that in recent movies because they tend to want to make it as realistic as possible. And so the skepticism is based on the fact that the industry has developed new revenues of entertainment using the latest digital technology to bring about an ultra realistic visual representation where live action and VFX, as well as true and false, are interchangeable terms, which kind of goes into how we've kind of been wanting to go more into like making things more realistic, especially with like the way we use our special effects, the way we, we've changed everything. We're not trying to make it as brightly colored as the previous movies. And that's not to say that now we're seeing a decline in movies with lighting. There's still tons of movies like Moonlight, I Saw the TV Glow, or Nope that came out pretty recently that are all really good movies that utilize, uh, dark scenes, but they use lighting to make sure we don't lose any of the details. So it's not to say that movies are getting bad, but it's definitely to say that because technology has been getting better in a sense, I think a lot of filmmakers have been trying to find a way on how to make them, how to work with it, and we still kind of have to work to make those a little bit better. So while technology has been, getting better, CGI is definitely getting better as well, and a lot of filmmakers are trying to find that balance between realism and fantasy. We still just have to work with it to just see a better balance. And these are all the sources that I used.